Well, thank you so much for attending today. I'm really excited about today's topic of Sabbath, and we're going to get into Sabbath and trauma. And I'm really excited about our guest today. I first want to just start out by saying that this series, if you're watching it now, it's pre-recorded because in July, I'm actually going to be practicing what I'm preaching, and that is taking a sabbatical. And if you email me this month, I'm going to be getting back with you in August. So it's not like I'm ignoring anyone, but I really believe in recharge and rehydrating spiritually. And I really love doing this work. I love the channel. Guys, I love you and you're worth it. And yet I know that I'm worth it and I need to recharge and connect with God and my family as well. So I will be getting back with you in August. I hope you enjoy the content. The other thing is please subscribe. I am getting really close to hitting 1,000 subscribers on the channel, and I just want to say how much of an honor and a surprise it is. I kind of thought that I would be at 1,000 subscribers maybe by the end of the year, but by the time this airs, I might actually be at 1,000 subscribers, and so it kind of makes me emotional thinking about it, just because I started this channel out of passion, but this is becoming a ministry. And so if you're listening right now, hit the subscribe button and like and share it as well. And the channel is growing. And I just want to thank everyone for all of your help. And without further ado, I really want to introduce our guest today. This is someone I've known for probably about 15 years. Joel Pete has been a disciple for 29 years himself, married for 25 years, has 3 children, 19, 17, and 15, all disciples, adopting a fourth in the process here, and that child was 5 years old. I've been in the full-time ministry for 25 years. Planted Chippewa Valley Church in 2006 with 5 people. It's grown to well over 100. Planted another church on top of that. Has a master's in biblical studies. Founded the Climb Ministry, a small church leadership committee, conference, webinar designed to inspire and strengthen small church leaders. He serves on the ICOC Minister Health Task Force Committee, spearheading sabbatical research as well, and founded the Waters of Rest ministry designed to help ministers find rest and renewal through sabbaticals and Sabbath rest. Joel Pete, welcome to the channel, my brother.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. It's an honor to be here, and I have much respect and admiration for the work that you are doing. So, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking time, brother. You are a busy man and you have good boundaries. So you say yes when you mean it. And so I appreciate this because this is a huge yes and a huge blessing to me today. Joel, why don't we get into, because we got a lot we want to get into today. I'm just looking at my chops here. Tell us a little bit about your conversion and why you went into the ministry.
Well, I was converted in 1992 in Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota as a 20-year-old. And I was just halfway through college, and I was majoring in biomedical engineering. And it kind of relates to why I went into ministry, because I just grew up wanting to help people and felt like I could use my math and science acumen to help people in a medical way. But then when I became a disciple, really saw that the deepest needs people had and the deepest solutions was those of a spiritual nature. And so was pretty quickly just I was baptized in September of 92, and I found myself on staff of the campus ministry there in December of 1992. So that was a little too quick in retrospect, but God's in control, I guess. And just wanted to help people.
Amen. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that. What I want to do is I want you to give us an understanding, a biblical understanding of Sabbath. I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions about Sabbath. We think of certain
Hmm.
movements that really adopt, even in their name, the concept of Sabbath. When we look at the Jewish faith, specifically Judaism, Sabbath is a cornerstone. You even have certain tribes within, I would say, Christianity, certain spin-offs like the, modern day sort of practicing Christian Hebrews who really bring it back. And so it's just a lot of thoughts, a lot of, I want to say competing thoughts about Sabbath,
Right.
but help us to understand Sabbath biblically.
Well, that's a great question because there is a lot of misunderstandings about it, and I'm still continuing to learn what it really means. But I think I would start by saying what Sabbath is not, or what a sabbatical is not. Um, I really think it's important to understand that Sabbath is not just a day off. That's more of a westernized idea of you work Friday and then you take a day off. Maybe go to church, maybe get your shopping done, go to Shields, go to Dick's Sporting Goods. It's not just a day off. It's also not just a Old Testament law thing. Oftentimes, we as New Covenant disciples can dismiss a lot of the teaching around Sabbath as, oh, that's just an Old Testament thing, that's just a Jewish thing, or that's just it's just a Seventh Day Adventist type thing. And so we dismiss it. And I think we really do ourselves harm when we dismiss this. And so Sabbath, is not a law or Old Testament thing. I believe Sabbath is a God thing. And just like Jesus took maybe the rules around marriage and divorce, not back to the law, he took it back to Genesis chapter 1. We see the same way with Sabbath. If it was just a law thing, it would be fulfilled in Christ, and the New Testament Christians kind of can easily dismiss it, but it goes back to God, who God is. And so we see the words really see it start in Genesis chapter 1. But I want to start with the word Shabbat, which our word Sabbath comes from. It means literally to cease, a very strong emphasis. So like to cease, exclamation point. And another way this word is interpreted is a way to celebrate. So the idea of ceasing and celebrating are both found in this word. And it is a day. So in other words, it's a intentionally carved out space in time. And so since it's in time, you have this idea of rhythm. So to take a day to cease working and to celebrate establishes this life rhythm, so to speak. And we see this in Genesis 1 and 2. First of all, the first thing God created is light, and then he separated the day from the night. And so he created rhythm. So the earth is formless and void, tohu avohu. You have chaos, you have unstructured nothingness. It's a very interesting picture of what there's. And so the first thing that God did was he created rhythm, and then he created in rhythm. So day one, this, day two, it was evening, it was morning, day two. And so there's just beautiful rhythm going on in Genesis chapter 1. And then he practiced rhythm. He created for 6 days, and then he ceased and celebrated. And the English translation, some of them, it's like God finished the work of creation. And you think, oh, well, he was all done, and so he rested. Well, no, the word actually means he brought to a finish. So he said it's time to stop. It's time to cease. Of course, creation wasn't a finished product. It was in the midst of the work, an intentional stopping. He created rhythm into his creation, right? Every human, how do we do? And we neglect a night's sleep. It's not good. We see rhythm in seasons, we see the rhythm in creation, we see humans. There's so many rhythms. The moon is the waves, the tides. I mean, you can't look in hardly anywhere in creation without seeing a very specific and intentional rhythm. And when you start to violate that rhythm, It's been called, you go against the grain of the universe. And when you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters, especially when it deals with our souls.
Wow.
When you go against the grain, it's going to start to produce trauma and violence, which is your area of expertise, right? So he practiced rhythm, and then Genesis 2, it says that he rested and he blessed the seventh day and he made it holy. Now, what that means is there's three things in Genesis 1 that God says he blessed. He blessed the animals, he blessed the humans, and in both of those, the context is that the blessing is that they would have life and that they would multiply life and they would be filled with life and fill the earth, right? And so then it says he blessed animals, he blessed humans, and then he blessed a day. Interesting, right? Like, in the same way, then this day is a blessing. It's filled with a blessing. And if you take, there's life in this day, there's multiplication, there's a filling of the soul, so to speak, that goes on this seventh day. So he blessed it, and then he says he made it holy, or he sanctified it. So this is where the distinction between a day off and a Sabbath day is important. My day off is not necessarily holy.
Wow.
But a Sabbath day is a spiritual day. It's a spiritual mountaintop day, so to speak. And a lot of this bleeds into sabbaticals and all this sort of thing. But you have this sanctified rhythm. And then God, this is all just Genesis 1 and 2. And then you have God commanding Sabbath in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and the Decalogue, 10 Commandments. And it's very interesting. It's the only one of the 10 Commandments that we feel like we don't need to obey. And yet it's the most detailed of the 10 Commandments and most carefully explained. If you
Oh my
put the 10
goodness.
Commandments on a pie chart, 30% of it would be given to Sabbath day explanation and that sort of thing. Isn't that
I did not
interesting?
know that. Wow.
Yeah, 30% of that pie chart. So we don't dismiss thou shalt not murder, don't commit adultery. That's Old Testament stuff. That's Jewish stuff. We don't do that, and yet we dismiss this really easy. Now, it is important to state right up front, I don't believe that we are under law today. And so the Pharisees really abused a lot of the rules and this type of thing. We find Jesus correcting them. But I don't think Jesus, who practiced Sabbath, by the way, as did the Apostle Paul, I don't think that Jesus would correct us for our legalism around the Sabbath. I think he would correct us for our neglect of the Sabbath. And so when Jesus says God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath, he was emphasizing it's not man for the Sabbath. It's not about your law keeping, rule keeping to earn status and approval of God. I think he would emphasize, hey, God made the Sabbath for you guys. God made the Sabbath for man. So if God made something as a gift, let's receive it. And so the Sabbath is a gift to be received from God. And it's much then, and once you start to practice this, you really start to get that it's not just a day. It's not just a 1 day a week practice. It's a way of being, so to speak. It's a spirit of restfulness that comes from abiding, comes from living in the Father's presence all week long. Walter Brueggemann said, people who keep the Sabbath live all 7 days differently.
Wow.
And I would add, if I may be so bold, that spiritual leaders who practice Sabbath lead all 7 days differently. In my 20 plus years of experimenting with Sabbath, it has completely transformed how I lead. When I look back to how I led before I started doing Sabbath, sometimes it's just, you just shudder. But we have to learn a lot of times the hard way to get the point across. So a few more things, and then love to hear, interact a little bit. I think Sabbath establishes rhythm and boundaries. So if you have this one day a week, there's boundaries, there's a rhythm in your marriage, in your family, in your church family. Um, if I could just tell a little story, so we're adopting this little girl. I can't say her name yet because she's technically in the foster care system, but we're about a month away from adoption. But we've had her for about 17 months, and she comes from a very traumatic background of it's horrible first 4 years of life. And then she was taken from her mother. And so we brought her into our home, and it was intense. It was intense. The ways that she would respond, throwing, yelling, screaming, hitting walls. Like it was really intense. But what we did initially is we just tried to establish a rhythm to her life, and that we were there, we were present, we would keep her safe, and just a rhythm. So simple as this is bedtime, this is get up time, this is mealtime. Very simple things. That alone has dramatically transformed this little girl. She is so happy and healthy. She takes no and of course in the foster care system you don't you don't have corporal punishment. So there's discipline, but more in the form of timeouts and that sort of thing. She's incredibly transformed. And so it's like, what happened? And it's like, there's just a rhythm and and presence. It's just so much healing that comes from that alone. So last thing I'll say is this is St. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you.
Mm.
And Sabbath has been a way to create that space for spiritual intimacy at a depth that, a quiet time in the morning just can't get to. So Sabbath and then retreats, and I have a whole Sabbath system. But the spiritual intimacy and everything that comes from that, healing, comfort, perspective, transformation, spiritual formation, all these things are an overflow of that. And then not just a ceasing, though, but a delighting, a celebration. And Dan Allender said this. He said, the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. Sabbath is the holy tie where we feast, play, dance, have sex, sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, and watch creation in its fullness.
Come
Few
on.
people are willing to enter the Sabbath and sanctify it to make it holy, because a full day of delight and joy is more than most people can bear in a lifetime, let alone a week. And I can just be a witness to the transformation of joy and celebration and delight. And that, of course, as a leader, frustrated ministers don't make very good ministers, but the ministry has a way of affecting you that there's complex trauma, there's compassion fatigue, there's all sorts of things that we deal with as ministers, that if there's not a very specific way to restore that kind of pure love for God and delight in people, then our unhealthiness will set a culture for the church, for our families, etc. So talked for a while.
I love it. No, I wanted you just for our listeners, the work that Joel is doing isn't just something that we need to hear about. This is something that we haven't had a good teaching. We haven't had a hygienic teaching. You look at when Paul writes to Timothy, this idea of having a good a sound teaching, but a hygienic teaching. And there's been some distortions. There's not just neglect, but this is a serious
Mm-hmm.
issue. This is a serious issue, and I wanted you to just start with the facts and just get us where we needed to be, get us oriented. And so I appreciate that. Let me go back and just kind of talk about a couple of things that you shared. Part of this takes me back to I had a Pentateuch class that I took, and going back to Genesis 1 and 2, I think when we read Genesis, we read it through Western eyes. And so one of the things you really did is you kind of got us to look at it a little bit different. I would add Genesis 1 and 2, you'd mentioned chaos from an ancient Near East perspective. A God who comes in, I mean, he's like a divine warrior. Like the elements had to be conquered to some degree. When you look at the ancient Near East
Mm-hmm.
comparisons, that was a precedent. I mean, God is basically saying is he's ordered everything, and you've been invited into that order. Unfortunately, Adam's order is different from God's order. And so Sandra Richter is a great author who really details this in her book Epic of Eden. I'll put this down in the description. But just that idea that the world we see around us, this is not what God had planned in terms of Sabbath. God's idea of Sabbath is that he's reigning everything, and he's got everything well ordered. Well, sin comes in and disorganizes all of that. And so that's what trauma is about. It's about a lack of Sabbath. And then we go to the
Mm-hmm.
Decalogue. Decalogue is kind of interesting because it's really 10 words. And it's this idea that, you know, when you think of Sabbath, it's this intersect of I'm in sync with God. And my listeners hear this a lot, but I'm in sync with God and I'm in sync with my neighbor. The Sabbath is transitional on the Decalogue. It's at that point where you go from, the first three commandments are primarily focused on worshiping God.
Mm-hmm.
Now the Sabbath connects us with being in sync with our neighbor and our family. And there's actually three transitional pieces there. And so this idea of if I don't do Sabbath, it's not just making a statement about my relationship with God or just about my
Mm-hmm.
relationship with my neighbor. It's making a statement about both.
Mm.
And that's so vital. And I think part of what you've done is you've gotten the conversation going in a way that I think is undeniable. And, if people are kind of, and guys, we're going to get to a lot today. If people are pushing back against sabbatical, we need to lean into that because, and we're going to get to that, but there's people who are, guys, there's people who are pushing back against this idea of sabbatical because maybe it feels scary, maybe they don't understand it. So we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But I love this idea of that we're invited into how creation works and the rhythm. And if you go against, I've never heard that. If you go against the grain, you get splinters. And
Mm-hmm.
just you've really you've put a lot of energy into this, and I think this is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to share that you didn't get to with that piece?
Um, no, I mean, I think, yeah, I think that's a good starting place for the conversation. Things to think about.
I want to read something that Joel sent me, and it's quite I do a lot of research, but to be honest with you, this I've not found anything better on Sabbath practice, clergy stress, and complex trauma. There's a guy who's doing his dissertation, Kanipi, I think it's his name. He did his dissertation on this idea of healing for clergy and serving in stressful appointments. And I want to read something to you. He talks about the stressors that drive clergy to depart from the full-time ministry seem to revolve around three problematic areas: unrealistic expectations from church members. Oh boy. Perceived pressure to produce numerical results from officials, and ongoing congregational conflict with no support from officials. And so I kind of want to use that as a base plate for the next piece of our conversation here. Because I think for a lot of ministers, you're talking about a little bit, we got these guys wound so tight, some of them, and when
Mm-hmm.
they finally snap, there's like little to no grace and
Right.
understanding for the process that led them there.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of get into that for a moment about those ideas of the pressure that leaders feel, how that maybe affects them being able to take sabbaticals and so forth. Can you just start by speaking to that?
Sure. Well, I've been in the ministry now for since 1992, so had a little bit of time in there, so about 28 years, and I think it's a very interesting, unique cross section of stress and stressors. Um, so yeah, you have everything that he mentioned. You have the expectation of growth and feeling. It's complex because you feel like uh, I need to grow this thing, but it's God's job to make it grow. But you feel like it's my job, and if it doesn't grow, then it's my fault. And um, but then you have but which is normal for a job, but then you have but this is my relationship with God. So so the inability to disconnect or separate my walk with God, my career, and my family. um, so much of a minister's family is put in the fishbowl, so to speak. And if your children, you know, act a certain way, we all have heard preachers' kids, right? So you have this cross section of career, faith, and family that really, most people, it's kind of like a three-legged stool. In the ministry, it's like a one-legged stool. And yet there's a lot of pressure on that one leg. And so you have, therefore, what I'm advocating is because it's a unique, every job has stress in it, every job has expectations in it. But there's few jobs where all three of those things are combined and a lot of pressure put on it, whether it be from uh, from from within or from within yourself or from outside. There's a lot of pressure there, and there's a right kind of pressure, then there's a wrong kind of pressure. And so, Sabbath and sabbaticals then is a unique way to help the minister sustain and maintain and thrive with that. And so taking the time to separate out issues, my role, not my role. I'm not, God is proud of me, not because of what I produce or what role I serve in, but of who I am as his son, etc. So that takes a lot of teasing out and separating that the spirit does. And again, a quick quiet time, you just can't, it actually can get worse because you feel more pressure to produce and you don't have the tools to counteract that.
Joel, let me ask you a question, bro. And I'm going to start getting real specific because I've got a growing number of elders, evangelists, ministry leaders, women's ministry who reach out to me and they got real problems.
Right.
And when you think about the culture, so for example, as of 1990, right? So when 1990 came along, Christianity Today put out that by the year 1990, there were over 500 mega plans to evangelize the world by the year 2000. Can you just help us out with the dynamic that we see for between members and ministers who both feel traumatized by those growth pressures?
Sure, sure. Well, I love the ICOC. I've been, this is my family, and we're serving to get healthier and everyone wants to continue to get healthier and healthier. One of the things I did in graduate school was I did two or three research papers on our history and turning points, and so that was super helpful. It was also helpful to get outside perspective on us, and the outside perspective was very encouraging, as well as honest about things we needed to change or grow in. So that was really helpful. I think that I I think anytime we do something spiritually, uh, with humanistic expectations or human expectations or goals, um, you're going to have a conflict. Um, and so one of the biggest things in the early 2000s that we discerned in our own leadership was an incredible amount of humanism. And so then it was like, okay, well, how do we lead a church spiritually and not humanistically? And so I think that whenever there is human expectations or uh, human centered one another relationships, even so to speak, when the spirit is given to us to be at the center and our job is to follow and obey the spirit, then things go well. so um, and so I think we're still trying to figure out how do we enter into leadership or one another relationships in a spiritual way that's honoring of the spirit's leadership, not our own leadership. And then how as human leaders do we lead spiritually, not humanistically, et cetera, et cetera. So I can speak from my own experience coming from a time from the early 90s and the mid 90s, or the decade of the 90s, when that was at the pressure was probably at the highest, um, to then the early 2000s when we started seeing things, and to what we've worked since then is to really try to learn what does it mean to lead spiritually and to have a spirit-centered, Christ-centered church instead of a agenda-driven, goal-driven culture. And so prayer, and a house of prayer, and then this whole Sabbath-based leadership, has been two of the things so far that have really come to the surface that God has really worked powerfully in the culture of the whole church. And so when you have a leader that's honoring the Sabbath, there's so many things that it rubs against: codependency, human centeredness. Even one of the benefits to a congregation of a minister taking a sabbatical is that it communicates that we're okay without our leader. We don't need them, so to speak. This is Christ's church. Christ is the head. And the leader can be like, hey, they're okay without me. Like, that's good for them to understand that. And but yet when they come back, there's an incredible renewed sense of appreciation because they also had firsthand exposure to all the roles that they play. And so
Too
what
many.
I'm promoting is that a sabbatical is not just for the health of the minister, it's for the health of the congregation. This is why almost 25% of Fortune 500 companies now require sabbaticals. In the world, they're requiring sabbaticals for their executives. So the idea of, well, I don't get a sabbatical, why should you, which is a big hindrance to a minister taking a sabbatical. That idea is becoming not a good argument, because if you worked for the right company, you actually would get a sabbatical because the world is seeing its value on the company and on the employee.
Incredible.
And it hurts my heart to see that the world is gaining this wisdom and implementing it faster than our church, because it's the wisdom of God. So anyway, that go ahead.
See, I had a feeling that we'd need like 3 or 4 interviews in order to just even feel good about what we've covered. I just there's so many things. The so the piece about the growth pressure. So first of all, in the 90s, how okay would it have been for a minister to take a sabbatical? First of all,
Well, sabbatical, and this is where there's so much misunderstanding. A sabbatical in the 90s was more of a probationary tool.
mm,
So you only did a sabbatical when you were about to be fired. And so um, I, 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 it was, every church was different and every culture was different. But I remember even the idea of a vacation or a day off. I remember one time vacations were threatened if the growth didn't pick up. And I even in as a young minister in the mid 90s, I pushed back against that. I'm like, you can't do that. I wasn't in leadership, I was on staff, and it's like, you can't do that. Like but that was kind of the culture. When Christy and I were dating, uh I there was times where like, well, we're not going to have dates this certain times of the year because I'm going to be busy, studying with baptizing people. So and I remember it was July 4th, and she's like, "Are we gonna do something for 4th of July?" And I'm like, "There are no holidays in the kingdom of God." So that's the background. I would get 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night. I was just going for it. So it's good to mention that I've I was this way. I was a workaholic, and in reaping the consequences. So sabbatical was a probationary tool. It's transmorphing into more of a mental health burnout prevention tool, which is true. But my vision is that it turns into a spiritual mountaintop discipline. It's a spiritual discipline. So it's not in reaction to I'm about to burn out or in reaction to I'm about to get fired. It is a part of what we do in order to build healthy ministers and healthy ministry cultures. So in other words, I don't go on a date with my wife every week because we're about to be divorced. I don't go on a marriage getaway because I have to keep it healthy. It's a delight. It's creates the space for credible intimacy. We want to. So habits, disciplines aren't in reaction to something. They are a part of how you build something. And so my vision is to keep moving the idea of sabbatical out of a minister's about to burn out, they need a sabbatical. If a minister's about to burn out, well, you need to take a sabbatical, but you need to take a sabbatical before you're about to burn out. It's just part of, in Eau Claire and in many places, they're developing sabbatical policies. It's just part of what is expected of you as an employee. Every 5 to 7 years, you go on a 2 to 3 month sabbatical. That's just part of what we do.
Now let's help equip people who have concerns about sabbaticals or Sabbath. And let's address their concerns, because everything's going to be divisive that creates change and is a part of
Mm.
growth. I mean, growth is literally by definition typically about division. I mean, my wife, who is that's the first time I'm saying this. My wife is we're expecting child number 2. And
Congratulations.
yeah, I told you, but our audience doesn't know. So, oh boy,
Here
here we go.
we go.
But
Cat's out of the bag.
growth is literally about something dividing, but this could be very similar, where this is going to cause some division. And I was talking to a colleague of mine in the kingdom. Her name is Glenda Sullivan. She is a very respected clinician, and I just shared this with her today, and she wouldn't mind me sharing this. And I shared with her that, hey, there's pushback. And she said, well, part of that has to do, with the older generation, is they associate sabbatical with academia. Okay.
Mm.
And they have some not grudges, but some maybe concerns about how things are going, maybe in that direction, let's say. But that's
Mm.
separate, right? And so what trauma does, let me just trauma commercial break. Trauma gets things that go together that shouldn't go together, and things that should go together don't go
Mm.
together. So, for example, when it comes to numbers and people abreact to the idea of numbers,
Mhm.
well, you can go through scripture and numbers are used very consistently in Israel, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament.
Sure.
Numbers are used, but trauma gets them to go together in a way that the association prevents peace. Okay.
Mhm.
So there are
Mhm.
people who, let's say, very much have associations with sabbatical, and maybe they're associating
Mhm.
it with academia. Maybe they're
Mhm.
associating it with, well, I don't get that. Or they're associating it with, but wait a minute, what's going to happen? And there's fear, right? Their theology
Right.
is in threat. So let's encounter those people compassionately here, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you wanna say to some of those people who have some of those concerns?
Well, a couple things. That's a great question. I think first of all, as I've traveled the country and spoken, or actually, through Zoom now all over the world, spoken about this, the vast majority is very positive. Um, so a lot of elderships and a lot of ministers are very, very for this idea. Um, see the blessing of it. So I think for those who are more cautious or more concerned, I think that we have to talk about why and honor the reasons. Honor, in other words, not just dismiss it as, oh, you just don't get it, but and then minister to those things. So I think there can be a connection with academia, there can be a connection with entitlement. And so there's a fear of, if I take a sabbatical, then people will think that I'm super special. And you have this contrast like, well, the average Joe member doesn't get a sabbatical. Why should the minister get a sabbatical? That sort of thing. So you have misunderstandings, you have fear of criticism, you have fear of it's just going to hurt the church. Church is going to fall apart, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in order to give a response, I think you have to kind of understand where it's coming from. But a few metaphors I've used so far that has seemed to really help connect is the idea of the one-legged stool versus the three-legged stool, that when you are paid in the ministry, you can't just come home from your job. You can't leave your job at the office. This is your walk with God. This is your family. You love these are your people. You love them. These are your kids. Like, there's no disconnection. And so the strain, and that's because that's a unique strain, it needs a unique solution. And that's where the sabbatical comes in. Like, let's give this incredibly pressure-filled one-legged stool time to relieve that pressure and put up some other legs around it so that that leg can get healthy and can get strong. Another is there are different types of sabbaticals. There is an academia sabbatical where you do have the time to go and write or to research or study or whatever. And that is there's a learning type of sabbatical to take 3 months to go do a class or whatever. The sabbaticals that we're most promoting is the refreshment version of sabbatical. So I think it's just understanding. So in response, I would, when I did this talk in Houston, and I spoke to the church, I spoke to the leadership group, I spoke to the elders, and spoke to the staff. And so when I spoke to the church and the leaders, the overwhelming response was, how can we get our ministers to go on a sabbatical? Like, how can we support them? Like, they were incredibly supportive. So it was really good
Wow.
for the elders to see the support from the members. And then in the elders meeting, a lot of these questions, but a lot of it centered around how do we answer someone who's critical of this? And so just helping, and that's a kind of an education piece, I think, primarily. But ultimately, we don't lead based off of what the most critical person is going to say. We lead based off of where God is leading us and
Correct.
where the Spirit is leading us, which everyone knows that. Well, everyone agrees with that. It can be hard emotionally to get there if you have some vocal critics. But then it was really interesting with the ministers. The ministers were like, we need a sabbatical. We love a sabbatical, but it's very challenging to advocate for yourself. And so this is where ministry staff, elderships, leaders really work together to support one another to answer those questions. And one of the things I'm doing, so we're having Shane Engel is organizing a retreat for ministers in Alaska at the base of well, it used to be Mount McKinley. It's renamed, I forget. But one of the things a role I'm playing in there is how to take this week-long in nature, solitude, and silence retreat experience and get it into your daily, weekly, seasonal rhythms of life. And this is what we've been experimenting with since I was in Omaha, to be honest, in the early 2000s. And I have for me, because we've tailored it, fine-tuned it for so long, I have a very specific daily, more so weekly and seasonal retreat rhythm that takes me back to what I experienced on my sabbatical, and brings those things. And so I'm leading out of this centered, peaceful place versus a reactionary, chaotic pace. So pace is a huge deal, huge deal. Well, that's really great. I appreciate you sharing, Kyle. I think that what goes on, Mark Comer said this in his book. He's like, toward the end of my Sabbath day, I feel like my soul has caught up with myself. And so there is even in the midst of 124-hour Sabbath, I'll just share, like I go in exhausted, frustrated. Something is probably gonna burr under my saddle. Some sort of issue or problem or whatever. It's just got me kind of grindy, just irritated. I'm just gonna go, rebuke that brother or whatever, like some sort of quick fix, unspiritual, deal with it. I call it fix it Felix, challenge it Charlie, judgy Jim. I'm all kinds of things. The last thing I need to be in this situation. And I will go into Sabbath and rest, sit in nature, silence, phone is off, everything's off, complete solitude. And by the time I come out, I'm telling you, I feel like a brand new man. And it is, people are like, what do you do on the Sabbath? It's not about what you do. I think it's a spiritual thing. It's a fact that you've honored it. You've carved out time. You're just trying. God meets you there, and it's so transformative. And then I multiply that with I take 2 6-day retreats a year. And then I am a different person. And I have the church pray for me. I have the leader, everyone the church knows, going on my 6 days, pray specifically prayer, about certain situations. And my wife and I was kind of like, so what'd you hear? Where are we going? And of course, it's not like just because I thought it on my retreat, that means it's the Spirit of God, whatever. There's a community vetting process to the leadership of the Spirit. But so often it's just, you come back and the church is just like, oh, that's exactly what we need, this sort of thing. So it is transformative. And what a minister gets out of this, this benefits question, I have a list of congregational benefits and minister benefits. So I don't know if you'd like to talk to both of those, because one of the things
our audience, I think, would be very appreciative, Joel.
Yeah, I'll start with the congregational benefits, because this isn't just a minister thing. It's a church thing. The congregation benefits, their confidence in Christ is increased. They've realized that big personality minister is gone. Guess what? Church was great. Preaching was great. People came. I remember there was one of my good friends right before, when I took my sabbatical in 2016, there was a friend that we'd been reaching out to for a while, So they say, hey, we're coming to church tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, you're not going to believe it. I'm not going to be there. Matter of fact, I'm not going to be there for the next 2 months. And he's like, oh, that's okay. We're still coming. And when we got back, he came up to me and he said, this place is amazing. We kind of hope you don't screw it up. And I said, believe me, I pray that prayer every day. But it was actually, and then there was another man who was in his 60s who he said it to me, it was the preaching of the brothers, it was the convictions of the members that won me over to this church. And he studied the Bible and got baptized. And this other person who said, I hope I don't mess it up, they studied the Bible, got baptized, and now they're on our core leadership group and the president of the board. So it was very good for the church to see, for me to see, this doesn't revolve around any human. This is the Lord's church. It's empowered by the Spirit of God, and we can do it. And we're not codependent on a leader. So their confidence in Christ, the confidence in themselves, the leadership training that went on, everyone had to step up. Everyone had to step up and fill the gap, fill the roles. It was great training that happened with that. It was like a ministry systems test. I do a little plumbing, and the plumbing always works great when there's no pressure on it, right? There's no leaks, there's no pressure. But you got to turn the water on, you got to shut the faucets, and then it's pressurized. And now we know where the leaks are. A sabbatical, it pressurizes the system. So now we know where the leaks are. Now we know where attention needs. Now we know where there's gaps. And it strengthens the whole church as you respond to those leaks, so to speak.
That's so necessary. Wow.
And it tests the systems. Every church has systems, ministry structures, and most, hopefully they're communicated and organized. A lot of times they're just happens, and so the removal of a large personality can test that system. Number 5 was a renewed appreciation. So after someone has walked a mile in your shoes, then all of a sudden, the things they were really kind of irritated about you, they're like, wow, I understand now. So there's a renewed appreciation the minister has for the church and the church has for its minister. And that's super, super healthy, important. The church receives a spiritually revived leadership, because when a minister, one of the things with Sabbath that surprised me is how much God says, you need to do this, but it's not just for you. It's for your servants. It's for your cattle. It's for God has the land take a sabbatical every 7 years.
But you can't argue with that. Hold on, Joel. You can't argue with that. The land, everything, and there's different lengths, 70. Oh my gosh. Anyway, thank you for saying that. You can't argue with that.
Yeah, right. And so, so when you free yourself to rest and be human and have limits, now everyone else is freed. So we have people in our church who are going on spiritual retreats constantly. Like all of our core leaders, they're going on retreats, they're doing their days, they're doing their version. And none of them look the same, but they take the principle and apply it to their own circumstances. And so now you have this rest is okay. Saying no is healthy. Having boundaries, being human, not robots. It frees everyone to answer their call from God, not just the pressing needs of the ministry, and to have limits around that. So it really is amazing. And then our church had increased productivity and growth. So the growth people who say, well, how does this affect the growth? That's going to be one of my research projects. Is I want to do a longitudinal study on the health and growth of a minister who does do sabbaticals versus one who doesn't. It'll just be interesting. But I'm confident our church experienced the most amount of growth in its history after my sabbatical. And it wasn't the amazing ideas I had on my sabbatical. I think it was God communicating. Now, of course, we're not going to try to trace out growth and why it all happens. It's foolishness. But I will say that if you have these benefits on a congregation, and then you have the minister benefits of rest, healing. I mean, I look at Elijah of the benefits. Dude was just exhausted and he just slept. Physical, we're most people are far more exhausted physically than they realize. So rest, the healing, the health. I've received more comfort from God on my own trauma in my life on my retreats and sabbaticals than I love counseling. Therapy is awesome. I think it's a great tool. And counselors have been very helpful, but I've never had the kind of healing that I have had on my retreat days and sabbaticals, times of rest. So I think real clarity of calling. So Elijah rested. He had the time, the 40 days as he walked all alone he was very specific with what he was feeling by the time God's like, so what's up? And he's like, here's exactly what's up. I'm the only one left. We're no better than our fathers. I mean, there's all kinds of expectations, broken dreams, visions that he had not coming true for the people of God that he had delineated and separated the issues. And he took them to God. And then God said, okay, let me show you who I am. And that now here's your next steps. So clarity of calling, clarity of role, clarity of next steps, and just incredible reinvigoration. So I'm still going back to my sabbatical 2016 of executing steps from how clear it was the direction we needed to go. So I'm changed. My family's changed because we spent some incredible family time on the sabbatical, and the church is changed. And so
that I'm gonna bring it in for a landing, but before I
yeah,
do that, I want to ask you about that because can I get your advice?
sure.
Good. Well, I need you to help me with some discipling, man. Listen, this is real. My wife read Comer's book, and she's like, "I want to start practicing this." And then she was like, "Well, I want to start doing this as a family." And so I want my children, I want them to experience because my thing is that trauma prevents the experience of Sabbath, even if you observe it. Right? We have to. I'll be honest. We need some consistency. We need to habituate Sabbath in order
Right.
probably for it to have the effect that we're really looking for. And so
Absolutely.
micro Sabbaths, whatever, it's not just this the sabbatical that's away and all that. It's on a weekly basis. And so we're thinking like on Saturdays. Tell me what you think about this. Saturdays, that's going to be our day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's going to be really difficult because I mean that's a commitment. It means we're going to have to say no to
Mm-hmm.
some things. And in our
Mm-hmm.
culture, in our movement, we I mean, it's hard to say no and still feel like Jesus is Lord for some people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, if I said no, that was selfish,
Sure.
or oh, you're not committed to the body, and so I'm telling you, man, people need some psychological permission here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they
Mm-hmm.
need and through the scriptures, but even how people look at the scriptures, they still don't feel liberated, maybe
Right.
in the ways that they need to, even if
Right.
God is saying, and we see that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, like even if so I guess for us there's two parts, but one part is just the big part is the we want to observe this weekly. We don't want to we really want to bring our kids up in this way. And so I'm just
Mm-hmm.
wondering, do your kids know this? Is this something
Mm-hmm.
they are acquainted with?
Sure. Well, I think that it's great that you guys are doing that, and I would encourage you. So, what will happen is you'll just start. This is where I encourage people just start, and as you do it, they'll be like, "Oh, this was really good. Ooh, this," and it adjusts constantly. Christy and I just had a conversation about entering into, you know, this new stage, what it's going to look like going forward. And so we're constantly adjusting. Um, and so, yeah, our family, what we do is Sunday night at about, as a minister, um, Sunday is a work day. So the natural kind of end of the work week for me is going to be Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. So Sunday, 4 p.m. I'm not perfect at this, but 4 p.m. phones are off or in the Sabbath box, so to speak. And then we have a family time where we usually order out wings or pizza, what's just super good food, fun, enjoy. We have a meal together. Well, we celebrate God. We celebrate one another, encourage one another. We usually play a game, some sort of fun activity. Um, and then we'll go to bed early, and sleep. And Monday is a no alarm time, so I sleep till whenever. And so our Sabbath is kind of broken up into two parts. One is more of a family part, one of is more than a spiritual part. And then Monday, I'll usually go up to we were gifted a cabin about 45 minutes away from Christy's mother, who passed away. And so I'll usually go up to the cabin and kind of have more of a solitude and silence portion of Sabbath. Now Christy does hers differently as well. So we kind of have the family time, then I kind of have my time, and she kind of does hers a little differently as a mother. She also takes care of her father, who's 94. She also now we're adopting this 5-year-old. So we're so anyways, so yeah, the kids. But this is after years of experimenting and that sort of thing, and it's really interesting. A big question is, what do you do on the Sabbath? And in the Bible never really addresses that, because it's more what you don't do, and then what you do at that time is a lot of individual, what a lens to think through or look through is what fills my tank, what brings life versus what drains life. And so I golf on the Sabbath. I go for long walks. I'll sit out in nature. I'm a contemplative type soul, so I just sit out. And,
You
um,
golf? Oh no.
golf is it actually a very therapeutic. When I was going through a lot of trauma as a teenager, golf was a therapeutic thing for me. So I still identify with being out in nature and hitting that ball is therapy. So anyways, I think it's great you guys are doing that. I think work on it for a couple months and let's talk again, because you're going to learn things about your family, about yourself, that work and that don't work.
I appreciate the permission to experiment and then have the experience come out of that. We don't have
Yes.
to be perfect at Sabbath to start it. We don't have to study it, know the Hebrew and the all. Like we don't. We can just get started, and God's Spirit will lead us, because it's really an encounter with His Spirit. The person of God is a spirit. It's an encounter. Relationship is a contact sport. So in
Mm.
terms of just getting out there and being led, sometimes Sabbaths may feel like a wilderness, I'm sure. Other times it may feel like an
Mm-hmm.
oasis. There's different
Mm-hmm.
types of experiences, I'm sure. But yes, and I appreciate your input on that, and I appreciate the permission to experiment. Quickly, so Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination
Yeah.
of Hurry, that's something for us to take a look at. Do you have any other favorites that you recommend to people?
Yeah. I do. I have a whole resource list, and really, it's kind of, it really depends on what you're looking for.
Okay.
Um,
I can put that down in the description, by the way, for people.
I'll go a few options though. If you're
Okay.
looking to learn about sabbaticals, This is a guide by Rusty McKee. It's really good. So if you're a minister wanting to go on a sabbatical, and this is one of the things that my wife and I are coaching many. We've helped about 50 or so people do sabbaticals so far, and we're wanting to coach people, set them up, help, whether it be working with the church, eldership, leaders themselves, their kids, their family, whatever. Um, so if you're looking for an introduction into like Sabbath, this is a classic. This book by Abraham Heschel. Abraham Heschel is a rabbi, so it's kind of more of the history of the Jews and what they did. If you're looking to spiritual retreat, Ruth Haley Barton, I think, does an awesome job. Just book Invitation to Retreat, Silence and Solitude, Sacred Rhythms. There are 3 different books. She does a great job of equipping and inspiring retreats. And then, yeah, John Mark Comer, this Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. One of my favorite books on Sabbath is A.J. Swoboda. A.J. Swoboda, the title of that book is Subversive Sabbath. Subversive Sabbath. So, and John Mark Comer and A.J. Swoboda are buddies, actually. So they kind of refer to each other. So I've got all kinds of lists, but as starting points, those would be good resources.
Okay, any upcoming announcements you want to let the people know about?
Yes, thank you for asking. 4 things, actually. We have this ministers retreat put on by the Anchorage Church, Shane Engel. That's coming up in September 6th through the 13th, and then 20th through the 27th. There's going to be professionals there, Jennifer Conzen, myself, different resources for you there. So if you're a minister and you want to do a retreat, then communicate with myself or Shane Engel. We're going to have another minister health webinar. Our first webinar it's around 500 people all over the world that attended this webinar. So we're going to do another one of those in the fall. We're going to have a shameless conference here in Eau Claire. Steve Sandin does a lot of work on shame and intimacy with God, etc. So we're going to do a shameless conference in Eau Claire in November, and then we're going to have our second small church leadership conference in Dallas. We had the first one in Eau Claire in 2019, the Lookup Conference. So we're going to do our second one in Dallas, December 2nd through the 5th. It's entitled Climb, and we're going to have a whole day of that conference devoted to minister health and minister family health. And so super excited about that.
Well, brother, I cannot wait. And you have done something that I think I don't want to see overshadowed in the least. You are a minister of ministers. You are an evangelist. You've been in the game for a long time. And one of the things you've done is you've just proven it today, is as a minister, you have reinvented yourself. And I can tell it, you have a renewal of just innovation. A lot of ministers, there's just a lot of one dimensionality happening. And you are like, it's amazing to see, because I think some people look at ministers and like, okay, that's just their congregation and they preach and that's it. You're a great example of, in balance, how to be innovative. And I think there's a lot of people, in fact, around the world, I know for a fact, who are blessed by what you offer. And I want to say something to you that I say to all my folks. And it's interesting because I have such a deep relationship with you in a way, but that we are with you and that God is for you, my brother. Thank you for blessing us today.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for having me, and keep up the good work yourself. And I will be praying for you on your sabbatical. I can't wait to hear about it, what you learned and experienced.
Absolutely. And if you joined us through the entire video today, and I'm sure this one may be a little bit longer, but amen. I want to thank you. And again, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, like, share. The content the channel is growing. I'm so thankful for so many of you who continue to inbox me, continue to reach out to me over Facebook or LinkedIn or all over, guys, from around the world. I had no idea that God was going to create a ministry out of this, but he has. And a person isn't growing this channel, people are. And so this channel belongs to you and it belongs to God. And I'm so grateful. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.